And for the Hansard record, could you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Dr. Keith Joyner, appearing as an individual but working with the University of New South Wales.
Would you like to make a brief opening statement before we go to questions?
I would, thank you, Chair.
Proceed.
This opening statement just takes a few minutes to introduce me and Defence Test and Evaluation in general, and then a minute to look at critically the past decisions by Australia on JSF test and evaluation, where the JSF test and evaluation is today, and where Australia should go in the short term. I'm a senior lecturer in test and evaluation with the University of New South Wales in Canberra, teaching this subject to postgraduate students studying Masters of Project Management and Systems Engineering. And I spent 30 years in defence. 10 of those were planning and conducting test and evaluation, and the last 5 years of which I approved all of the test strategies going to government submissions. The aim of Defence Test and Evaluation is to uncover technical and operational risks and to use that to inform good decision making. So the earlier and the more often you do practical test and evaluation, the less surprised you will be, and the better able you are to plan, and the more likely your capability or project will be to succeed. So if we look at JSF in the past, Australia's project for the Joint Strike Fighter has been and continues to be poorly managed in its test and evaluation. That is the Australian component. The testing is not early enough or sovereign enough for something that is supposed to define air defence of Australia for the next 30 years. Some examples are the decision in 2002 to choose the JSF was without preview testing of the many mature alternative aircraft, and that's been covered already today. When we contributed funds for this highly developmental program in 2002 and again in 2009, when we ordered our first couple of aircraft, we chose not to be part of the developmental test and evaluation. We chose to rely on the US, the UK and the Netherlands and the contractor for all of that developmental testing. And that has outsourced our most sovereign insight to these technical and operational risks. Again, in 2013, when I pushed for Australia to be part of the JSF developmental test program, and at the time we were seeking to put all our aircraft into production, I ran into a shallow circular argument where staff would refer to the aircraft as off the shelf, and then they would correct themselves that the aircraft would be off the shelf for Australia when we got it. And staff were very proud of the fact that Australia had the access it did without having to be given to contribute test personnel or test aircraft. And they were convinced it was inevitable that with the wherewithal that the US was throwing at it, that Australia's plane would come in time, and they're still convinced of that today. If we look at where the program is today, no one would care about that history if the JSF testing was going well. But the independent report only 6 weeks ago on the 29th of January by the US Chief Tester, Dr. Gilmore, shows that the test program is going badly. Dr. Gilmore and his deputy have been in Australia. I hosted them 3 times, and I've been in the US and been hosted by them 3 times. He and his staff are fiercely independent, factual and rigorous in their test planning, execution and reporting. Now that's required by US congressional law, but it also personally pervades everything that they do. His report on JSF this year is the strongest language and the most detailed ever to be given to Congress. And the 5 most concerning aspects of his report, he says the proposed bulk buy of the production aircraft before testing is complete may not be legal in accordance with US Title 10, Section 2399. I only wish that Australia had a law that said you can't go into production until the testing's complete. Second, the validation of the simulation model for the JSF aircraft is badly incomplete, lacks leadership, and the small percentage of testing, if you look at page 57 of his report, he says 10% of the capability of the JSF in that simulation model has actually been proven. That's 90% that hasn't been proven. So that's a real worry. The software development for the Block 2B in 2013 through to Block 4, which is due in 2020, has had to restart testing 3 times. And in that period, Some aspects are worse. The software deficiencies are at an all-time high level, and the capability advancements between software upgrades has been given up. So there'll be 7 years in which we have just fixing bugs rather than actually progressing the capability. And the weapons integration testing is going badly. There's 50 tests still to do. Each one is taking about a month on current schedule. So that's 4 years before we'll complete the weapons integration. And finally, the cyber security testing. Okay, the cooperative vulnerability and penetration testing for the actual aircraft, never mind the logistics system, hasn't been commenced. And there's no assurance that Australia will be part of that testing. So until that does, that software, in my mind, remains vulnerable. If we look at the future, what should we do from here? Firstly, don't take any more production aircraft. Take the pressure off the test program and let's just get that finished. Join the developmental test program. Do it on a pro-rata basis. We're buying 3.2% roughly of the aircraft, so we should have 3.2% of the testers. Offer strongly to lead the validation of the JSF simulation model. I think at the moment his view is that it lacks leadership. That would be a useful task for our project office, is to run that validation, and it would be welcome because it would be independent from the company and from the US. Join the Canadian test program and evaluate the alternatives. Let's just get ready. Okay? Not saying you have to cancel JSF, just let's get ready with a test program. And finally, watch for other programs where Defence is trying to do the same thing as they've done with JSF, i.e. not send test people. Perhaps it's the Triton program, perhaps it's the Future Submarine, but where they try to, do it on the cheap, please review that and make sure they don't.
Senator Conroy, do you have questions of this witness?
I'm good.
Senator Fawcett.
Dr. Joyner, thank you for your submission. Clearly from the statements I've made, I'd share some of the views you've put forward there. I'm interested to understand, given that you were in that role at the time that Defence was reforming its test and evaluation policy after the 2012 Senate inquiry, could you just talk briefly to the committee about the extent of support within Defence for that reform and why then did they block your suggestions to increase our involvement with the T&E in the development stages of Joint Strike Fighter?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. It's a long story and I don't want to make it long, so I'll keep it brief. At the time that you raised the issues in that Senate inquiry into defence procurement about the lack of preview testing and the fact that we were being gulled into off-the-shelf thinking with a lot of our T&E people, we were trying hard to make sure that Army vehicles like the Land 400 had a solid preview test program to check these off-the-shelf vehicles. We were trying hard to shape the submarine program to have a period of early preview testing. And I had an excellent example from Air Force come across the committee tables, and that was the P8, where it was a fully cooperative development program, and it had just achieved milestone C in the US, which is ready for production, and it had an OT&E report that was handed to us from the Navy, ComOp Tev 4, saying that it was good to go and full disclosure, and that was great. But 3 months later, along comes JSF, talks in off-the-shelf language, and we're not making any contribution to the development test program, and we were papering over a lot of the technical issues that were present, such as the validation of the simulation model. That's, in the US speak, a Nunn-McCurdy breach, which is the equivalent of a project of concern. Nowhere in any of those submissions did we talk about the fact that that had been present since 2010 and is still present today, that they're failing to validate with an independent government agency to the rigour that is required in the US the capability of that model and aircraft. So I found it disappointing, that was all, and it frustrates me that we could undermine a lot of that good effort to shape future programs by allowing this very large and very public project to be seen as an example of how you do test and evaluation.
Do you have any indication from the US as to whether they would welcome Australia seeking to be involved in the ST&D testing?
Only so far as you talk to DOT&E, and one of their efforts last year when they put their report to Congress was that they were frustrated by the amount of resources being assembled for operational testing at a time when the developmental testing was under-resourced and they were failing to achieve their test milestones. And so if you read last year's submission from DOT&E, it says that they facilitated moving those resources across to the developmental test program. Thank goodness they did, because you roll on a year further and it's still in some difficulty. But they need all the resources they can get to get this done, particularly leadership in some areas like the validation of that simulation model, where we could play a very useful role if we were allowed to.
You mentioned future opportunities in terms of lessons learned, and you mentioned Triton. Are there opportunities you're aware of with Triton where Australia could choose to be more engaged?
So the Triton, as you know, geostrategically, there's no more important aircraft for Australia than that one, because we have such a large area to cover in maritime patrol, and it does it with some phenomenal new technology. They are about to go into their first OT&E program in 17-18, and it would be very useful if, in addition to flying out of Guam, they flew out of Australia and check some of the terrestrial infrastructure that is necessary to operate such an aircraft in Australia, albeit in a nice, safe place like Learmonth. So I think there's opportunity there, but at the moment I don't believe we're investing in being part of that operational testing for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Senator Xenophon.
Dr. Joyner, thank you very much for your submission. In terms of your opening statement, do you have a copy of
Yes.
that? Is it able to be...
Casey's got a copy for
Oh,
you.
good. Okay, that's terrific. I just want to further to Senator Forster's line of questioning. Your submission raises a fundamental concern that the testing regime Defence has adopted for this program is predicated on the aircraft being non-developmental. Is that right?
Yes.
Right.
It's what I call promissory MOTS. It's a term I came up with that, it will be MOTS when we get it.
Right, okay.
It's the only term I could think to call it.
Okay. So, on that promissory basis, now, noting the position taken by Defence and the project's developmental state, do you think that the Air Force have really ever been in a position where it understood all the technical issues with the aircraft or the performance boundaries of the aircraft? Or their extent of understanding, to be fair?
Yeah, so you look at the difference in perhaps what Dr. Gilmore is saying in the US versus what our Air Force is saying publicly, and they seem to be worlds apart, which is frustrating in itself. If you set aside the sovereign argument, it's cheaper to just let the US make the decision for us. You set aside the lost opportunity, which is that, we won't put testers into the program so that people working on the aircraft today don't get the same opportunities we had 20 years ago. You set that all aside, our policy says that we will use the US T&E policy, which means Title 10 law, which means Dr. Gilmore is God. Right? His word is the only word that matters in the US T&E system. And so we should be expressing at the highest level what his concerns are and doing all we can to address those.
And God has spoken, hasn't he?
God has spoken. We need to do the cybersecurity testing. We need to get the simulation model validated so we can prove that what Lockheed says it can actually do. 10% is not a big number. All right? If people are referring to data and somebody has the data, they're referring to Lockheed's data. They're not talking about the one person in the US that actually matters, and that's Dr. Gilmore. So I just think that we should take a more pessimistic view in our leadership and put pressure on the company rather than actually helping the company by trying to shore up the program.
and papering over any problems with the
Yes.
with the program. So how significant, from your point of view, given your expertise in this field, is it that Dr. Gilmore has made these scathing, if you like, comments?
So, as I said, he's never put out a submission of that length to Congress before, and he's certainly not used language like it may not be legal under US law, and actually appealed to the Congress to intervene. Poor leadership in terms of the validation of the simulation model, reminding people that it's a McCurdy breach, so it's been a project of concern in Australian speak for 6 years, and that he wants that fixed. And, you know, I welcome that the program manager says he's got it and he's going to go and fix it. What we need to do is just guard ourselves against overcommitment on this program and prepare ourselves to make an informed decision. So do the testing.
So I've just got a couple more questions. There are real time constraints. So you're actually saying we should get out of the F-35 program, but we need to be much tougher in the questions we ask, and we need to use Dr. Gilmore's concerns as the battering ram if you want to open the door to get questions answered.
Yes, I mean, it's almost un-Australian that we haven't rolled our sleeves up and thrown some test resources to help
I
out
haven't heard
that
an
test
Australian in
program.
the course of this inquiry, so thank you. Just very quickly, in your submission you stated that you raised concerns as to the test and evaluation approach being adopted by Defence when you were the head of test and evaluation from you're head of test and evaluation for a bit over 4 years, from December 2010 to January 2015. If you feel uncomfortable about answering the question, I won't press you about this, but how did Defence treat your concerns? Or actually, stuff it. This is part of this parliamentary privilege here. You can say anything you want.
Yes, chance to be frank.
Defence is a broad church, and the committee process, Capability Gate Review Board, was the one that you sit in. It's a one and two-star committee, and they sat and heard those concerns, and they balance up all the various risks. Test and evaluation is just but one. There are lots of other concerns that weigh in their mind, one of which is the impending problem with the Classic Hornet, and that was the one that Air Force kept tabling, is that, you know, the Classic Hornet runs out of legs and we don't have time left to go looking and investing anymore.
I'm running out of time. Do you think Defence treated your concerns seriously enough?
They absolutely listened to them, and they logged them, and you can go back and look at the committee records today.
Okay, they listened to them, they logged them, but they didn't act on them.
No, they didn't.
Okay. Finally, Air Power Australia's fifth generation fighter table, I'm not sure if you've seen that. I've just been asking all the witnesses about that. Do you consider the table to be useful? Do you consider it to be sufficiently robust and accurate? Is it a helpful document? If you don't consider it to be so, what are the errors? And I'm happy for you to take that on notice.
No, it's an easy one to answer. I mean, that table is very useful if it was structured in a capability submission to government. Half of it would come from an intelligence assessment for the aircraft you don't have access to. The other half should be done by a test team flying around the world and actually flying those aircraft and evaluating it. And I think that's, you know, appealing to the 2002 failure to do that sort of staff work. And then rolling forward to today, we've got threat development, we've got aircraft development. If you redid this in 18 months' time after a test team has flown the ones that are available and the intelligence community has put together its assessment of the ones that are not available, that would be very useful to inform government about whether we are really still on the right track.
And directly supplementary very quickly, in terms of what Senator Fawcett was asking you about, I mean, is it fair to say that we've really dumbed down our test and evaluation capacity, particularly in terms of this project, that we've really been hands-off in terms of the F-35s?
There's a lot of lost opportunity here. I mean, you know, people join the Air Force to be an engineer and a pilot to work on the best of the aircraft. And for some reason, we've got all of our people working on anything other than JSF development. So I think there's a lost opportunity in terms of growing our skills and expertise to be able to turn around. You know, when I did my testing, I got to integrate the medium-range and short-range air-to-air missile onto the Classic Hornet. Today, that integration of those weapons is being done by an American. So my replacement is not as well available to do that sort of future work.
Thank you very much, Dr Joyner.
Senator Whish-Wilson.
Thanks, Chair. I'm interested if in the 10% figure you said around testing and 90%, I wouldn't say uncertainty, but 90%, or would you say uncertainty? Would you use that word?
I would encourage you to read page 57.
Yep.
It's pretty damning in terms of, trying to set up fighter versus fighter,
Yep.
or two fighters versus two fighters, and run a validation
Yep.
of the simulation model to see what's occurring, and it says it has to be suspended because of difficulties with the validation. That in itself is a clue to a problem that the US is having.
Yeah, I have actually asked questions to DOD in a confidential briefing on Dr Gilmore's comments. I'm interested in the cost of this. If we're not sure about the deficiencies, and yet we've got a cost of $17.7 billion that's been provided, how can we be sure about that the total cost of the project, the acquisition, if we don't actually know whether we haven't actually tested for the deficiencies?
Yeah, so essentially what will happen is that we will end up with a series of modifications that have to be done up to our aircraft. If we take our aircraft too early, so let's say we take them in 2019, the US testing is still ongoing, Block 4 software hasn't come out, then we're committing the program to a series of major modifications and uploads sometime around that 20 through 23 timeframe. And, that has a double impact. It has the impact on availability. At a time that you're just trying to stand it up, you've got to set aside aircraft. We saw with the Hornet upgrade program that nearly 30% of the aircraft were down at any given time going through those modifications. If you consider that the aircraft itself is trying for an availability target of 60%, it's currently at 51 according to Dr Gilmore's report, that's only half of them are flying in the first place. Take away another 30% to go through a modification program and you're down to less than 20 aircraft flying in that time frame. It's not a good look.
So this comes back to this concurrence issue. We shouldn't be taking any aircraft off the, if pardon my simplification, off the manufacturing plant until these things have been tested, because we may end up inheriting aircraft that have potential deficiencies that therefore need to be adjusted further down the track.
Absolutely. I mean, and that concurrency argument which you've just run on an engineering level also occurs on an operational training level. You've got to question why we're actually training in the aircraft at the moment, right?
Yep.
How many times are people going to learn to take off and land? Because that's about all you can do with this thing at the moment. Every time it goes up to do comparative testing or anything remotely advanced, there's too many limitations on it and too many software bugs for the test program to continue. So operational testing, which is the next phase that it should be going into, the main aim of that is to learn to fight with the aircraft.
Could you remind the committee again when that's supposed to be, like for Australia?
So at the moment, Australia's kind of programmed, the former Chief of Air Force said, 2019, 2020 is when we're looking at doing our operational testing. The purpose of that is to learn how best to fight with that aircraft. So what are we training our pilots for now if they're not part of the test program, and yet we don't know yet how to fight with it? We must be only using Lockheed Martin simulations which come up as being unvalidated.
And they haven't been verified or validated.
Yeah, and the training program distracts from the test program. Why don't we send 2 flight test pilots to actually help out in finishing the test program instead of having 2 guys over there on 60 Minutes who are training to take off and land? It doesn't make sense.
It looked good on 60 Minutes.
It did, but there's concurrency both in an engineering level and an operational training level that I have objections to. You never take the A variant of an aircraft for a good reason. Let someone else do that testing and then take it.
I remember when Top Gun came out, a lot of my friends wanted to be fighter pilots. It was a very big recruiting tool for the US. Could I then therefore ask you, based on your experience and your understanding of Dr. Gilmore's role and the importance of what he stated recently, do you believe that we will get the JSF will be delivered for an operational phase in 2019? Are you confident that we can achieve that? milestone, or do you think that's a pipe dream?
Dr Gilmore is not confident. That's why he says things like you have to triple the amount of weapons integration testing, triple the pace of weapons integration testing.
And is that pace increasing, from what you're aware?
No.
In fact, isn't the opposite occurring? Isn't it reducing?
Well, as I say, test resources are capped.
Yep.
The amount that they can spend is capped. So I don't see how, if you're doing one weapons integration test a month and you've got 50 to go, that's 20/20 to me. So we could be on track by doing things like, let's not worry about those particular weapons. So we go into operational testing with known deficiencies and a lack of the weapons, right? We will definitely go in without that VSIM model. And that in itself is a problem for all operational testing. And again, he goes to that on page 57. He says that, you know, without that model, I have to now do a whole lot more operational testing. Chances are it won't be ready when Australia needs to do its operational testing either.
Okay. Then you mentioned weapons integration, you mentioned fixing software bugs, and then finally was, how do you describe it again, stopping these things from being spammed and...
cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity, they're the words I'm looking for. So adding all those together, then they're still on top of... Will they actually have to be completed by the time the plane is due to be delivered for operational phase in 2019? Will that be ongoing at that time?
Well, it's really going to test the US laws, because the United States Air Force, in theory, can't go into operational test without Dr Gilmore's recommendation, or the Secretary overrides it and Congress agrees, and away they go. And
They did that on national
operational
security
testing.
grounds. They did override previous cost overrun legislation.
It's a matter for the US. It will be fascinating to see how that plays out, because I think that's the direction they're headed, is the pressure to take this aircraft early and commence testing on it is enormous.
Can I, just last questions, I think unfortunately we're out of time. I mean, when I was watching 60 Minutes and the aircraft couldn't take off or couldn't turn on, I was just thinking simplistically, is it possible for an aircraft that runs on software and uses Wi-Fi and all these kind of things to communicate that, if it under a cybersecurity situation, if it was spammed, it could actually fall out of the sky? Is that just a stupid thing to think, or is it, what kind of threats are there from cybersecurity to an aircraft this sophisticated or this complex?
So the University of New South Wales has just stood up its cybersecurity centre, and they're exactly the issues that we've been looking at. A lot of these systems are vulnerable because they assume that only the developers can get in. And you can use electromagnetic probing to put your bug on for a system denial. And they're some of the things that this aircraft needs to have done on it, using their laboratories in Florida.
Would that be the case for other aircraft existing, though, the fourth generation fighters?
Yeah, the legacy systems are at risk.
Yeah.
There's no denying that. But the focus is on bringing in, making sure the new systems are robust against cybersecurity threats. And, you know, there is a good test program that's been developed by Dr Gilmore for that to occur. It has a red and a blue team fight for the defence of the aircraft. The problem is that the software is so in a state of flux, trying to resolve those deficiencies, that everyone says not yet, not yet, not yet. So whenever that cooperative vulnerability and penetration testing starts, you know, my big thing is, where's the Australian that's going to be part of that testing? Is there an Australian that's going to be part of that testing? Why wouldn't there be, given that we're going to connect it to a different information environment when it comes to this country and change the surface attack area of the system?
Thank you, Dr Joyner. The time allocated has elapsed. Thank you very much for your evidence. If you have taken questions on notice, please respond at your earliest convenience.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
We now welcome